us on our hearing on taxi and private hire services. The first one, we have our guests already before us. So we've got James Farrar, who's from the United Private Hire Drivers. Welcome, James. And we've got Steve Garlick, who's the regional organiser for the GMB Professional Drivers branch. So welcome along. Good to see you here today. And I'm going to kick off the questions. Really, there's a lot of discussion over many months and years about working conditions and rights for drivers. So could you perhaps outline your current concerns around working rights and conditions for the drivers that you represent? So who would like to go first? Steve, do you want to go first?
I think where we are right now is possibly one of the lowest levels in history for private hire drivers throughout the capital. There is a control by operators that's perhaps never been seen before, and that's backed up by their Yelp for more drivers, for more cannon fodder, for want of a better phrase, based on the fact that rates are incredibly low in terms of where we are right now. They've not only stagnated, they've actually gone down from where we were even from 15 years ago. People paying literally pennies to go out to the likes of Heathrow Airport, or Gatwick, which used to be high quality runs. Drivers who are very reliant on having to work 6 or 7 days a week now to actually make ends meet. The costs heaped on them with regard to potential charges upcoming now for Euro 5 vehicles, where drivers had got the expectation or had the expectation that they were going to at least get 10 years full use out of a vehicle on a no different basis from anyone else, obviously adds to the woe. And we're in a position which is backed up by the fact that we have multiple cases ongoing against operators, be they Green Tomatoes, be they Addison Lee, who, as an example, this morning have been down for 4 hours, where drivers have not been able to actually make an income. Drivers have actually gone home based on the fact that the systems haven't been working. And there's more probably to talk about. I think we'll probably touch on that a bit later over what they've been doing with promo fees, taking money from drivers for promotions for the public. In fact, I'll touch on that now because I think it's quite important. Where a company is offering a promotion on social media of money off a fare, that is then being put onto the driver to subsidise, to help that company look good to the consumer. So they're putting the consumer ahead of the person who is actually doing the work. And this is a continued situation with companies. I met a driver not so long ago who said, "Oh, you know, we're one of the cheapest companies around." And I said, "That's a good thing, is it? How can it be good to subjugate the rate so that people cannot earn a reasonable income, and to be expected to even manage to get out or eke out a certain amount of jobs in a certain time is almost impossible?" We know what a living wage looks like. We know what a London living wage looks like. But in the meantime, we don't have a living fare, a minimum backstop for London. Now, I recognise taxi have minimum rates in place, which are highly necessary based on a metered fare. And I do not necessarily seek a convergence of that, because taxi and private hire must be two separate tiers. They must be two separate tiers to enshrine all of the rights that taxi drivers have worked for to get where they're going. But nonetheless, there is a common right for workers to have a quality of life and to be able to feed their families, to be able to take time off to be with their families and have quality of life, and not be spurred out knowing that they'll only make income based on having to follow a carrot that is being pulled by an operator. To come out, you might make more money at this time, like you see with app operators. And my other big concern, because I really want to let James speak, is just on this point of operators thinking they're being very clever about what they're doing with their marketing and how they position themselves as socially responsible. They're not. I know we're going to touch on cars and all sorts of other things later, but they're not, and people are not making an income.
I'm going to pick up some issues in a minute. Let's let James come in first.
Okay, well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to bring some evidence before you. The voice of the driver is weak in terms of regulatory development at City Hall or at Palestra for TfL, so I really appreciate this golden opportunity to be here. I think the issue here is that the industry is under massive transformation, and there's a lot of forces at work. There's big tech has entered this game through Uber and others. Big energy is involved. Shell has got an operator's license now and it's got a product called Fair Pilot. It started to onboard drivers, so it's entering the game. BP has just bought Europe's largest EV charging network. And then we look at the manufacturers. Daimler are involved through their investment in MyTaxi, Taxify, Black Lane, Viavan. Renault and Nissan are involved in their investments through iCabby, one of the big apps and technology providers for the second-tier operators in this country. Volkswagen are involved through their investment in Get. So what we see is this huge amounts of money and attention and technology being applied to the question of mobility. But unfortunately, at the nexus here are a group of workers. 120,000 people have been licensed in London. We're now down to 110,000. And these are people who are very vulnerable. According to TfL's own statistics, 71% come from disadvantaged neighbourhoods. According to the, I'll get it for you, the index, it's the IVN index of deprivation, the deprivation index for London. 71% of minicab drivers come from that. 94% of minicab drivers, according to TfL, are BAME. So it's quite a vulnerable group of people who are doing this. And unfortunately, they are denied their rights as workers. And they're also, on the other hand, if they're not workers, if we are truly commercial contracting entities, that we're supposed to be able to engage with these powerful forces around us without the protection of a regulator, without the protection of employment law. Well, we're in a very weak position because the imbalance of power is so great. And as a result of that, the average minicab driver now is netting about £5 an hour. Any way you cut it, working for Addison Lee, working for Uber, working for Green Tomatoes, working for all of those. And so we've taken a lot of action around the country against Vizu, the big regional operator, A2B radio cars in Birmingham. We've taken action against Green Tomato here in London and others, and of course the Uber case, which I'm personally involved in as well. But these are weak, these are weak moves. There's a systemic problem here that we need regulatory support. We need the support of the mayor. We need political support in order to be able to cope with this pressure that drivers are on. And one thing I would finally say is that 110,000 Londoners in a city of 10 million people, their reach through their families, through their dependents, is huge. And I think the mayor and I think TfL owes this group of people a great deal more responsibility and respect and protection than they've gotten so far.
So both you paint a picture of this kind of race to the bottom in terms of standards, in terms of the fares being so low that your drivers are having to work excessive hours and they aren't earning, in your views, even the minimum wage per hour, which is clearly a huge concern. Are you able to sort of give a bit more detail on that and maybe some examples of drivers? And also, particularly Steve was interested in your point about a minimum living fare, which is quite interesting. Can you explain what your thinking is behind that?
Yeah, basically, since I came to the GMB, I've advocated for a living fare, literally from day one. To put some more meat on the bone, when you look at how operators are working, be it on a commission basis or a rent basis for a data head, because most people don't use radios now, before a driver's even out of the blocks, they've got to make a fair amount of money to actually cover the bills. When you start to look at a situation, and I'm going to use Pool, which is a product of Uber, and I use I use the term product very loosely. you have a situation where a driver is, and they're selling it as an ecological package, let's be quite clear about this. You have a driver who starts at point A to then potentially collect a passenger at point B whom the driver doesn't know, hasn't been vetted, of course, like anyone else, but nonetheless they're being sent to collect that individual who may not get on with passenger A. They're then expected to take both passengers to different destinations which are ostensibly supposed to be en route, but don't necessarily follow a particular route, and they are then charged 30% commission. 35, pardon me.
25.
20, no, for the pool is 30.
Yeah.
For pool is 30, pardon me. So just 25 for the standard rate. So 30%, 5% more basically for the benefit of helping two other people out in saving a fare, which takes them more time to complete. And then, God forbid, something goes wrong, and I can give you a very good example that happened at Vauxhall not so long ago, where a passenger argued over whether he should be dropped first or not, which descended to a point where the driver got out of the vehicle because he was being abusive to the other passenger and then was knocked out for 15 minutes and had to then stay in hospital. There is a problem. Because not only are you being asked to give up 30% of your hard-earned income to take a longer journey with more mileage, but you're also being expected to act as a referee quite often. And you can imagine on a Saturday night two opposing football fans getting into a vehicle one after the other and what that leads to.
Can you explain this living fare?
All right, so going on to living fare, my perspective is there needs to be a minimum base that operators should be charging within the London environs so that there isn't this race to the bottom. And based on a minimum fare, just as you would with a taxi, you can be sure that people can then start to earn a reasonable income. If we are going to move towards worker rights, we recognise the fact that some of that money has to be funded from pension and holiday and other pay from some of the commission that people pay to be able to make that work. We get that. But it's got to be at a reasonable rate so people aren't living hand to mouth or using food banks or taking advantage of other charitable means or having to live on benefits because they are not earning enough because it suits the app company to keep them at the lowest rates. Because that's how it's really working. The app companies subject people to these rates because they know once you're in, you're in. But that means that they then have to rely on other ways of subsidising their income. You can find the stats, they're there. I don't have to tell you, most people know that's the case. Why should a company be doing that?
James, do you want to
yeah, I will. I'll jump in on this a little bit. So in the Addison Lee Tribunal ruling, you can read this on the matter of public record now. The judge in that ruling noted that it takes an Addison Lee driver 25 hours a week just to pay Addison Lee the fixed rent on the vehicle. So that's just before fueling or any other costs. It's 25 hours just to pay Addison Lee the rent for the privilege of using the vehicle to drive their customers. We know from our data that it takes an Uber driver 30 to 35 hours a week to break even before they can make any money at all. And so what you have is a push to work longer and longer hours because you have to dilute your overheads before you can earn. And the only way you can really earn is to work a lot of hours. So if you work 40 hours a week, you're going to be below minimum wage. You may need to work 80, 90 to reach a London living wage. And that's the problem. I think the population of drivers are in precarious conditions. They've been exploited at every stage in terms of the vehicle rental market as well and so on. I'm not so sure about the living fare because I think it opens up the opportunity. The unintended consequence could be that we have a living fare and then the operator guts that, increases their take, increases their commission, increases their ancillary additional charges to the driver, and the driver still doesn't earn any more. I prefer the New York solution, which is to guarantee a floor earnings. That's what New York have done. They've set a floor of $17.25 an hour. So that's $15 an hour plus $2.25 for a holiday. And they've set that floor. And it's up to the operator. If you cannot get your drivers across that line, of course they can make more, they're still self-employed. But if you can't get them across that line, then you need to top them up. That's already the law in Vancouver, in British Columbia. Has been for years. So these are the solutions I think that are better because it guarantees, it puts a floor in the market that's so badly needed. If we can all earn more after that, that's fantastic.
That New York example is very useful. Leeds are going to be having a conference call with the New York, I don't know what they're called.
Taxi.
Yes, exactly, to have a real chat with them about some of the plans and things they're doing there. So that's really useful for us to pick that up. Steve wanted to come in.
Thank you. I mean, New York Yellow Cabs would probably be interesting to talk to them because that's a different model altogether. I was interested in your point, Steve, about the minimum living fare. I just wanted a question about that. But we're going to get on questions about safety in a minute because it trips off the tongue nicely, and I'm fully on board with that sentiment. But again, I don't really get it because as you'll hear, I'm a regular user, twice yesterday, of private hire vehicle. I don't use Uber. Down in South London where I'm on the border of Surrey, there's no black taxis around. Don't use Uber, don't use Addison Lee. It's private companies, okay, that we use, and they're very, very good. But a minimum fare, I don't quite understand how that works, unless you had a minimum increase on a whole range of tariffs. How would this minimum fare work?
I think it harks back again to, obviously I'll qualify the point that James made, where obviously what I'm looking to make sure is there's a minimum amount going into the driver's pocket.
That's a different thing altogether.
Yeah. So when that calculation is made, it has to take that into account, of course. That's a given. I think from anyone, couldn't expect it to have a minimum fare and then somebody say, well, I'm taking 90% of you. That's workhouse conditions. But I think quite simply, when somebody starts off and you can see that there are places around the country where they're £2.50 and £3.50 fares to start off from, there's a chronic problem.
Probably a regional thing, because not in any experiences I have. It's normal. The fare is a minimum fare. I don't think would solve our problem in London. The problem that we all agree on. I think you'd have to change the whole tariff restructure.
Well, I think there needs to be a minimum, though, nonetheless, because it depends what a driver can crack out in an hour.
Okay.
I recognise that, but nonetheless, you need to be sure that money can be made up.
Okay.
And how you go about that, I cannot give you the precise formula, of course not. I probably want to enlist the help of a university professor to get precisely where I'm going. But what I do know is the efficacy of it.
Yeah, I like
the efficacy of it.
No, I agree completely.
And that's the key here, making sure that people know that they can feed their family at the end of the day and take a break like anyone else, whether they want to go on Hajj, whether they want to go to Tenerife, whether they want to just go to Cornwall, whatever they want to do, they can take a holiday like anyone else. They can look at somebody's house and say, you know what, I can afford to live in one of those as well, not in squalor.
Lovely. Caroline, you want to come in here?
I just wanted to pick up on some of the stuff that James raised about, well, first of all, saying that the driver voice is very weak, but in particular, this idea that it's not just big tech companies like Uber coming in, but it's also the Daimler, Volkswagen, BP, the kind of big oil companies. So I think I hadn't sort of appreciated quite how much those very big companies are getting into this. So it's not just that the drivers are dealing with exploitation from Uber that we all have heard about, but actually there's a whole lot of other businesses that are coming into this market. And I'm just wondering what you think that TfL should be doing that they're not doing to actually tackle, we saw how Uber came in and no one had their eyes open, and they've created a fair degree of chaos in London in all sorts of ways. Are there things that you think TfL should have their eyes open to that they don't have their eyes open to at the moment about this coming in of all these other big companies?
I think that's a really important question. I think TfL has the work cut out. The industry has changed so rapidly. When Addison Lee was the big player and was a certain amount of indulgence with, you know, once in a while with Addison Lee, but now it's completely changed, and I think TfL's capacity needs to change with that too. And you're right, Uber came in, disturbed things, and what we had is this situation where, you know, we had a culture in Uber of, as Mark Zuckerberg says, Uber is going to move fast and break things, whereas TfL was moving slow and breaking things too. And so what we need to see from Transport from London is a greater capacity to understand and deal with that, but also to listen to the stakeholder, listen to drivers. They haven't really been willing to do that.
And so when you say they haven't been willing to do that, how do they consult with drivers at the moment?
Well, let me just skip back to the issue of what TfL needs to do, and I'll answer that as well, if I may. First of all, we need to have a clear understanding of what's fit and proper. And what is fit and proper for, you know, there's this idea of a fit and proper person. Well, Uber, Volkswagen, Daimler, they're not fit and proper people, they're fit and proper corporations, and what behaviour should we expect of them in order to have a public licence to operate in London? So, for example, there's a contract that Viavan, which is a Daimler product, offers today. And in there, not only must you indemnify them against you asserting your own rights as a worker, that's standard. They all ask you to indemnify that. They go a step further. They ask you to indemnify them against the eventuality of HMRC or the Department of Labour, which we don't have one, but in the case of the government enforcing the law on my behalf, I have to indemnify Viavan in case of that eventuality, that the government would enforce the law. It even includes the words, enforcing the law where statutes are there to protect workers. I'll submit this in evidence to the committee so you can see that. But it's amazing to me that Transport for London can find that as a fit and proper entity to operate in London with those types of contracts. Same with Uber. You know, the judge found in that case that Uber's contracts were a fiction, twisted truths, and so on. These have got to be fit and proper criteria that Transport for London must be looking at these contracts that drivers have been offered and protect them, and where they're illegal, as these are, and unenforceable, Transport for London should make a fit and proper assessment about that. In terms of driver engagement, well, we've had real issues in being heard by Transport for London. So if you look at, on the taxi side, there is a taxi engagement policy, and 5 separate taxi organisations represent 25,000 taxi drivers, and that seems to work well. But there is no engagement policy for private hire. There is no dedicated representation. Steve does a fantastic job. He's the hardest working union man in London. But there is no dedicated voice for private hire drivers with Transport for London. And that's a real issue. And then where we have tried to engage, say, on issues like safeguarding, TfL refused to meet with us, and just on that topic, to the point that we had to go to the press and launch a change.org petition to get TfL to publish sexual assault data in amongst private hire drivers. And in the end, we started to meet with the cab enforcement unit directly ourselves, but we were dismayed to find out that engagement was rapidly withdrawn from us 1 month before Uber's lost its licence because of safeguarding problems last August. And we made an IOPC complaint, and 6 months later we get a letter from Metropolitan Police saying that TfL instructed them to disengage with us, to not work with us in safeguarding. Now, I've asked for an explanation and an apology for that, and I still have no explanation, certainly not an apology. I can do without the apology, but I think we need to understand why it is Transport for London would tell the police to disengage from us. Now, under Inspector Blaney, they did. Under Judge Sandhu has been wonderful, and we worked with him directly. But he has advised Transport for London that they should be working with us. So we do meet them on the side, but we're not part of the proper stakeholder engagement process. We don't attend the compliance meetings. We're not informed. And the Metropolitan Police have issued guidance. They've advised Transport for London that they should be engaging with us, but Transport for London have disregarded the Metropolitan Police own advice on this. So I think there's a lot to be learned here about how to do things better in the future.
Thank you. Lovely. And look forward to getting some details
I
in
will
writing
submit that
from
letter,
you
yes,
as well.
yeah.
Let's move on to the next area of questions. And we had a sort of two people wanted it. So Steve, you're going to kick off and then Navin come in.
And I think we have touched upon some of this
Yes.
already.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Just for my clarification, James, you talked about your engagement with TfL of your organisation. How many people or drivers do you represent? Are you able to put just my information, that's all really.
Well, look, we have open disputes here in London and throughout the country. We've just involved in quite a bitter dispute with Addison Lee and
I'm
Luton
sure there's
at the moment.
individual, because you talked about those, but
Yeah.
just because when I was cheeky with my two drivers yesterday, two different drivers took me to and from having a pint, and I hadn't heard the organisation. Can you just give me an idea, because this might lead on to questions later about the challenge you've thrown at TfL about engaging with you?
We consider our membership numbers confidential. I can say with some
Can you give us
authority
an
that
idea? Is it several
Give me a
thousand? Is it a couple
we're
of
the
hundred?
largest in the UK for private hire drivers
Yes,
now.
that
at the
may
moment.
not mean a massive
Are we
amount
talking
of-
I
thousands,
would be very
tens
happy
of
to submit the
thousands?
number in
Okay.
evidence to you directly. Would that be okay?
This is a positive conversation.
Yeah.
I was just interested.
But it's for strategic reasons we have to be careful
Okay.
on this
All
issue.
right.
It's a large number.
Yes,
It's
it
not
is.
just a handful.
We're growing about 7% a year. We've got elected committees in London, Birmingham, Nottingham, Northampton, Bristol,
So it is,
Glasgow.
yeah.
It helps us to have an understanding.
Yeah, and you may have seen our strike on the 9th of October.
Okay. That's really helpful. So we've heard, and I'm completely on side about the length of hours, and I agree with Steve completely about the length of hours that many of these guys and girls are having to work. I agree completely that many of them are coming from, because I have conversations from parts of my constituency that are disadvantaged, and the proportionality around BME is significant. And I know full well, chatting to these guys, that the hours that they've got to put in, and the hours that they've been working when they pick me up at 10 o'clock after a pint, because they've started working probably 6 o'clock that morning or something, or they're going to be working all the way through to 6 o'clock that. So I'm on side completely on that. So, but there's a safety issue there, and that for me, sitting there. And I think that's something that we want to have a conversation about. So this is about the consumer, the customer, that is with that driver who's been working already 10 hours, perhaps, and tired. So would you agree, and would you like to comment on the safety of passengers in the context of what you've just been talking about, either of you?
Well, I
Look
think...
at it from the customer point of view, not necessarily the driver point of
No, okay. I think generally speaking, the customer experience within London's vehicles is high. The issues, when you even look at the stats based on stops and complaints and everything else that TfL throw up, pretty much shows the same static amount across a period of time. The problem is that there are so many hours a driver puts in a day that obviously it is going to have an effect, just as anyone who doesn't get a normal break doesn't have the facility for refreshments. Obviously, probably 4+ years ago I walked into Palestra, had a meeting where I said we would like access to toilet facilities for private hire drivers. The allegation made was by some people, well, they can go back to their car office and use that, where we know full well when you look on those car offices where they can get to a car office, no drivers can enter. So
this was touched upon by an earlier report by this committee, so I get that completely, that the drivers need opportunity to have breaks, opportunity to have use facilities, etc. But they're being driven by this economical driver.
They are oppressed by the rates they're on, right, and by the expectation of an operator. And if you fail to do what an operator does, and you've been out 13 hours, and you want to do a trip back to home immediately without actually taking a passenger, and then you incur the wrath of the operator by not taking a job, you find yourself switched off and maybe not able to work.
Well, on the assumption we're going to be talking to TfL, not too far away, what sort of legislation or directives from TfL and the Mayor would help the safety of the passenger, which is clearly interlinked with the working pressures of that driver?
Well, I think certainly when a licence is granted, James
to the operator.
To the operator, James touched on fit and proper. And obviously we've got Lord Justice Bingham's response on fit and proper for drivers, but there isn't anything around operators. And in terms of operators, there needs to be a set of guidelines that they must adhere to. They must look towards reasonable breaks for drivers. They must look towards reasonable fares for drivers to actually earn the living, so they're not having to work all hours God sent.
But that can only be delivered in tandem with something like the solutions we talked about, which might be a floor, because all the operators say, well, of course you could have an hour's break. Off you go with that, because it's coming out of your pocket ultimately. It's got to come in tandem with
but
something
it's no different in a normal workplace,
right,
where people don't get paid breaks.
Yeah.
So let's not make that look as if that's anything that doesn't already happen in a bad workers' world already.
Indeed. Yeah.
So from my perspective, there's not that many great folk out there really doing the best by their employees. There's plenty of good ones, but there's many more. It's outweighed by the lousy ones.
So your mechanism is actually writing into the operators' licence conditions some of the solutions and options that we're talking about.
Absolutely, because when you have a driver who doesn't get his rent back, or because the company folds and then they open up a few months later, and they put in money for a vehicle and they're £3,000 out of profit, out of pocket, and the operator starts up again, or they move somewhere else, the director. How right is that?
No, James, who you got?
Sorry.
Yeah, I think at the root of the issue is an economic question.
Yeah.
Is you've got to cover your costs, and you've got, if you're breaking even 30, 35 hours a week, that's when most people are knocking off for the week, and drivers are only starting to earn at that point. That's the number one problem. I don't know a single driver who wants to be out on the road longer than they have to be. But I think other things could help. Steve touched on this. In the old days, the private hire drivers could return to a base and rest. That's not possible with the big app companies at the moment. There is no base, and you're in central London. Where do you stop? And I think the problem we have is that we haven't developed the operating infrastructure to support that type of model in London. So we have 40,000 Uber vehicles running around London, but they've got nowhere to stop. And I think we need to have at least 4,000 rest areas, stopping areas for private hire vehicles in London, and that should be either funded from the licence fee, or the operator should be funding that.
Thank you, Chair.
And that would reduce congestion and
Yeah,
also ease
got it.
things for drivers.
I don't want to come in, then I've got Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I want to first pick up the issue about legislation and the changes which are really urgently required. And obviously, as we know, that PHV drivers are not subject to road transport working time regulation. I think it's 2005. Yeah. But DFT, in its own review, has recommended to government that recommended that for an urgent review of the evidence and case for restricting the number of hours that taxi and PHV drivers can drive, yeah, which obviously has to happen sooner than later. Question is, what are the steps TfL as well as Mayor can take before the legislation kicks in to improve the changes in condition?
Okay, so obviously in terms of the DFT report, GMB had a high level of involvement. TfL were also involved. So I think what we've got as a finished product, which is this item here, this report here, comes from the hearts and minds of all that were involved, from across the political spectrum. I think we can all agree that when it comes to private hire and taxi issues, this is an apolitical matter, and everyone just wants the best for the travelling public when it comes to that. So what we've got here is an apolitical report. And I think the basis of it is a move in the right direction. Obviously, it speaks towards worker and driver rights. It speaks towards control over operators and how they operate. And I just want to come back to one of the points made about operators from outside the country. As far as I'm concerned, I find it a travesty that operators such as Get and My Taxi and all Viavan and all of these others, sorry, not Viavan, pardon me, Get, My Taxi and some of the others, Black Lane, are not licensed London operators, but nonetheless are dispatching vehicles within London and should be under the auspices of a licensing authority. They're having their cake and eating it. They're not paying back into the economy themselves. from my perspective, and this counts. So within this report, there's talk about legislation for these. If you want TfL to move with alacrity, get them to now ask these operators to become licensed operators. It's no different, and there's no control. They're dealing with people's data, finances, and everything else. I believe they should be under the same microscope as whether it's Uber, Addison Lee, Green Tomatoes, GLH, or anyone else for that matter. So this report speaks to that. And I think the other thing that is urgent, obviously from a report perspective, is the route that they take towards disability awareness and training and the like. I know we might have some questions on training and everything else later, but nonetheless, some of these routes towards training are highly important, along with, in my view, teaching the rudiments of first aid as an example, which could help in any number of situations within London. And I'm not just thinking about with passengers, but unfortunately we've had situations in London where other Londoners have come to harm, and having somebody on hand who could perform a bit of first aid could make all the difference. So I'll touch on that. But on the whole, the report, I think, has a lot to acclaim.
So on your question on safety and hours working, and I think, of course, we need to look at the control on hours, but I would come back and say the root issue here is an economic one. But that said, I think we also need to be careful about the limitations of setting hours, because we see with Uber is controlling hours, but they're only hours on jobs, not total hours on the road. And then we also have to look at the shift pattern. So a driver will work the morning rush hour, and then they may try to work the evening rush hour and then the nighttime rush as well. And it's very difficult, I think, to do this job where you can say, I'll only do the morning rush, or I'll only do the evening and the nighttime rush. The danger is that you're trying to do maybe two of those on either end of the day. And that is really, in terms of fatigue management, that's disastrous. So we should really try to understand a lot more about fatigue management in the industry. And I think this brings me to another point I think is really important, and that is the need for an integrated approach to safety. Now, if you look at any other transport mode that's regulated, air safety, rail safety, there's an integrated approach to safety management systems. There's a just culture for safety management systems. There's a predictive, reactive approach to safety management systems. But here, I think we stand off it. And I think part of why we do that is because the operators don't want to be seen to be training or directing their drivers, because they fear triggering worker rights, triggering an employment relationship. And the unintended consequence, or the knock-on effect of that, is that we don't have an integrated approach to safety management systems in the regulatory environment that we do see in air safety, rail safety, because the regulator isn't commanding it, and the operators don't want to see it because they're fearful of what it might mean for them.
Chair, last question, if I can have brief responses, please. Steve, you already mentioned that drivers have to work hours on end, even to break even, which obviously has resultant impact on safety of both passengers and road users. Now, there is this issue about Uber's loan policy on drivers here, which puts the pressure, and therefore the same issue there. Do you want to comment upon that, both of you?
So on loans?
Yeah.
Well, I think financing is an issue. Look, UPHD is a branch of the IWGB union, with the Union for Precarious Workers, with a lot of experience across the whole precarious industry. What we're seeing is that private hire drivers probably always have been, but are being pushed further into precarity. So how do you finance a vehicle? You can do what I did. You use my own vehicle, enter the industry. But these are family vehicles, they're not designed for this type of work. And you're going to wear it out faster than you can amortise it. And now what are you going to do? Can I raise the capital to buy another vehicle, or am I going to be pushed onto the rental market? If I'm pushed onto the rental market, now I'm working on a week-to-week. I can have the maximum flexibility on a week-to-week lease, or I can have a bit more flexibility on a quarterly, or a bit more lower price but locked in on a quarterly basis. So take Addison Lee, for example. It's £210 a week to drive a Ford Galaxy for Addison Lee. But and if I choose a quarterly contract, but if I want to have it on the weekly contract, it's £270. And so what we're doing is we're pushing people as they run out of capital, as they run out of money, as the margins become tighter and tighter, they end up getting squeezed on higher and higher financing and rental costs. We had a very sad situation where one of our members had an accident, lost the deposit, and was trying to get back to work. And she couldn't raise the money for the deposit. We obviously couldn't give her union money to do it, but we had a fundraiser to get her back on the road, and she also had some help from her mosque. But that's how hard it is. You lose a deposit, you can't raise the capital, you can barely afford the rent, you're on a week-to-week rental, and if one thing goes wrong and you're really stuffed. That's what precarious work is like today, not just for minicab drivers, but across London.
So I've got in front of me one of the plethora of agreements or packages available if you look on Uber's system. And there was one I saw yesterday where you're expected to put £2,000 down that you'll never see again. This one is kind of a bit similar. This is £199 a week flex lease for a 2017, not a brand new, but a 2017 Prius, which, I've checked the marketplace, go from between 14 to about £17,500. But if you're a large company like this leasing company, you can probably get them cheaper, I would imagine. Which means that over the period of the 36 months that this is payable is £31,644. Now, the great thing about this package at the end of it is you don't get to keep the car. You can start again. So it's stunning. It's there in black and white, and I'll happily be submitting it on. But then it gets better, because when you start to delve into some of the benefits of the early termination fee, where you have to have a minimum £500 when returning the vehicle as well to pay them, you look at the insurance admin fee on accidents, which if you don't report within 6 hours, where you would get to pay £500, they hit you for £1,000. Now, if I am lying in a hospital, the last thing I'm going to be blooming well thinking about is, hang on, I better call the insurance to tell them. So not only getting £1,000 admin fee, but also getting the value of the insurance back themselves on the vehicle, because that's what this agreement does. It shows you the position that drivers are put into. So forget the fact you've got to find the money. Forget the fact that you've then got to pay the money. If you go off the road, and we've already seen a drop in driver numbers, you have got the noose of the cost of a vehicle around your neck. And that is the real truth of it. People say, I listen to people like Hartley Brewer and others saying, you can go and do another job. Nick Farrar says it often, you don't like it, go and do another job. Once you've got a commitment like this, you can't just do another job. You've got to pay that. And I would remind everyone around the table, you're only 2 payments away from losing a house or a home. And forget it when it's a car. Once you've got the finance after you, the tally man, that's that.
Can I just add one?
Thank you. I'm just really conscious of time, James, and I've got Sean wanted to come in here. Can you then move Sean into your section on entry requirements to drive? So I know we started a little bit late, but
let me just
get some pace.
Really brief. I just want to circle back to this idea of safety. What sort of statistical evidence have you had that the number of accidents have increased as driver hours have climbed? Because it really seems like to make any money you have to work significantly more hours than you would have had traditionally. Has that had an impact on how many accidents we're having?
I think the statistical evidence that TfL have that claims there's a higher amount, I think the only evidence I can hearken to is the fact that insurance premiums seem to have increased based on the fact that obviously insurers have come into the market. Plenty have left now. It's a tighter market to actually even get a vehicle insured, and that's another point. £2,500 to £3,000 for some drivers to put a vehicle on the road. Look at that as a cost out of your pocket every week. I mean, that's eye-watering. So from a perspective, unfortunately, when you look on social media, whether we like it or not, there is a problem over daily occurrences of accidents, and that is because people are rushing, cutting corners. Yes, you know, they are interacting with devices, which we know is illegal. We know that we need legislation over using apps and how we interact with phones to make sure that drivers are safe. There should be voice control within apps to make sure that drivers and the are in a safer position with voice. You know, if you look at Waze, you can't even you know, work with it as an item unless there's unless you're stationary. You know, there's got to be some control here.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. I'm going to focus on entry requirements for drivers. So what are your views on TfL's proposal to toughen up the entry requirement for private hire drivers? I know there's been a lot of consultation, there's been lots of conversations around the English test entry requirements there. What's your view? What's the industry, the drivers' view on all this?
Well, I think it's been a little bit unfortunate the way TfL has gone about this. You know, on the one hand, we've brought a lot of people into this industry and you know, they've entered a world of precariousness in terms of financing vehicles and so on. But then once they're in the industry, they're at threat of getting thrown out on renewal of the licence if they can't meet the English language testing requirements. And I think that's a shame. There's a lot of drivers who are extremely stressed out about that at the moment, maybe have been doing this job for 30 years and are now faced with doing a fairly complex oral and written exam in order to keep their licence. Val Shawcross, when she was chair of this committee, suggested to TfL that an English language requirement must be based on the needs of the job, but then became deputy mayor and imposed a rather more complex English language test that was unfortunately presented to the public as a package of benefits to the taxi trade. I couldn't quite understand, you know, that juxtapositioning. I think we need sensible language requirements, but I think it's unfair not to give a grandfather clause to people who are already in the industry and have invested in vehicles. And I think it should be a sensible requirement for the job. I mean, I also think if you look at the integrated impact assessment on that English language testing requirement, there's something in there to the effect that they couldn't measure the benefit of it because they couldn't find anybody that said that this was a problem. So why were we doing it?
Does it feel like it's going to act as a cap on the number of drivers?
Well, I would say that that's probably the true intention, but I'm with Assembly Member Duval about this. That's not fair. If you want a cap, go and get the legislation and cap. But it isn't fair to have a scorched earth policy that costs drivers who are already in a very precarious position a great deal of stress, money, risk to themselves. That's not the way to do it. That's not good policy.
And just to think a bit deeper, what about this requirement to do an advanced driving test for private hire vehicles?
I'm in favour of all these types of tests that can increase standards, but the only thing I would say is that what we're not seeing is an investment in training. You know, you don't learn by testing people, you learn by training people, and there is no investment in training. And I heard LPHCA at this, Steve Wright, at this earlier conference talked about, you know, the commitment to training, but the reality is, if you look at the website, look at what the LPHCA was submitting to TfL in 2002 when regulation was born here, about what the requirements and the expectations of operators ought to have been. LPHCA lobbied hard against training at that time. I'll submit this in evidence. So we always, from the get-go, we've set an expectation amongst operators that they do not need to train, they should not train drivers. That it was, in that paper said it would be a waste. Why would an operator invest in a driver that is not an employee and they would be overtrained for the job? So I think it's a little unfair to come along with, you know, fairly complex testing requirements 20 years later, but there's no provision for training. And there's no ability for the driver to pay for themselves.
Are you saying that those tests should be valid? Because you just said that.
Yeah, definitely. Advanced driving tests, yes.
You just said that they were hard to test for the benefit of those tests because you could find no need for them.
For English language.
So for English language. So are you saying those tests would be valid if there was some training? Or are you saying you don't need to test? Which one?
I think if we're going to test, we need to train. Testing is not going to increase standards. Training does.
Sean, what I would say is very simple. If you're going to do an advanced driving test, it's not beyond the wit of anyone to be able to incorporate an English test within that, by dint of the fact that knowledge of road signage and roadcraft has to be explained to an examiner. Now, if you can have a conversation like we are, where did you go on Friday night, where did you go, what would you do in a situation like this, how would you deal with you picking up at a theatre, quite simply, the clarity of being able to explain that without the need for a further test and further expense to the driver, when they're going to be faced with quite high expense for an, for an advanced test, and this is what I've been saying, is a combine also training for first aid to make us the best of the best throughout the world. So we're envied that, God forbid, there's something bad happens, you've got drivers on who are probably nearby to be able to give that aid. But to use the crutch of a high-cost test that doesn't actually show the value of what we need for interaction. You know, in 26 years of driving, I never had anyone lean over my shoulder with a note and say, this is what I want to tell you. They spoke to me. And that's the truth of it. You speak with people. That is what this English testing came about. It came about the fact that people wanted to know you could communicate with the driver in the instance of an issue or to change route, or that there was a medical situation or a personal situation where you needed to know the driver could communicate with you. And it's been taken to the nth degree now.
Let me just move on to one final question. What's the private hire driver's view of the relevance and the effectiveness of the Mayor's taxi and private hire action plan? Steve?
Well, as much as I don't want to do it, I highlighted a couple of points last night, just as by the summer of 2017, standards of driving across the industry required by private hire drivers to pass a test. I'm paraphrasing here. 12, conducting further commitments full review of in-venue operating by spring 2017. I think we can pretty much see, just by 2 points that I highlighted, and there's more there, that we're nowhere where we need to be. Okay, now, the Mayor sets down a roadmap. The roadmap is basically for TfL to then follow. And TfL, unfortunately, God love them, have not come up with the goods on this. And the plan needs a rework. It needs actually to have us in the room to make suggestion of where it should go.
Can I interject, Steve? So are you saying the plan in and of itself is bad, or needs heavy reworking, or the delivery has been bad? TfL just hasn't done the work.
Delivery has not been up to scratch. But I think knowing what we know in terms of the cases that are ongoing, worker cases, I'm looking at a case now that I've just been stated for Green Tomatoes for August next year. That's how far it's going to take to get workers' rights cases. Knowing we've got these cases, the Mayor needs to be looking at the whole worker issue as well, which goes in line with this report here. So to improve this plan, you need to start to use this plan as well.
Okay, James?
I'll be very brief. I think the plan was okay. It certainly hasn't. Delivery has been poor. I point out a few things. Agreed fare estimates. That's not happening. That's not happening with Uber, for example. You don't open your app, order an Uber, and get a fare estimate. That was a clear recommendation, commitment here. That should be happening. That's easy for Transport for London to impose. The hire and reward insurance was not well conceived. If a driver has taken a few months off work, he's going to have to carry that heavy insurance. Some people may be seasonally working. I think that was not well conceived. I won't go into it, but I will pick out one single point though, and that is about rideshare. In 2015, there was a private hire regulatory review, and part of the terms of reference for that review was to look at the changing needs of technology, rideshare, and so on. And rideshare was specific, part of that terms of reference. Well, before the consultation had even closed, TfL and Uber had preempted it by allowing Uber to pool to start in December 2015. Now, we asked for the safety and assurances because Gareth Emerson went to the media and said that they had received safety assurances from Uber. And we said, well, we're at the sharp end, we'd kind of like to see those. And TfL wouldn't give them to us. They argued, we took it to the ICO, they argued that they needed a safe space with Uber with which to discuss regulation. So we never saw them, and they resisted that through to the ICO, through to tribunal. So we still haven't seen those. In the 2016 action plan, TfL committed to delivering by spring 2017 a protocol for rideshare safety. And now we're heading rapidly towards 2019 and we still haven't seen that.
So for you again, it's a question of poor delivery and maybe the need to modify the content.
Yeah.
That's enough for me.
Really helpful, thank you. Gareth, you wanted to quickly pick something up?
Yes, please, and it is quick. It's just on the English language test, and it's to James, because I know what Steve's used on this. Is it the whole English language test you don't like, or are there particular elements of it that you reject?
The complaints that I've heard from drivers is that, look, it's not practical. It can be quite a tricky test in terms of comprehension and writing. We need a test that has been designed specifically for the job, that helps you to do, that is clear that you can handle an emergency situation, change of route, as Steve said, right of receipt, communicate effectively in that regard. But to try and set an academic standard for this, I think, is inappropriate.
So writing essays about the conditions on the surface of Mars, for example, is absolutely irrelevant.
It would be, but my biggest objection, I think language, I support the idea of having good language skills to do the job, but my big objection is the lack of a grandfather clause. I think that is rather cruel, if I may say so.
Lovely. Thank you, Steve and James, for your evidence. It's been really, really helpful to hear that view from drivers. We heard from operators last time. Please do put in writing, because I know you've both clearly prepared hugely for today. Some of the other points maybe you haven't had time to make, or actually give us some of those examples from those contracts. But thank you both very much indeed. We're now going to swap our panels, and TfL are going to come and join us. Obviously, you're welcome to sit in the audience if you want to listen to what TfL have to say. I'll get some last time here. TfL, welcome. Come and make yourself at home. Have we got water for Gareth and Helen? Yeah, it's just being prepared. Lovely. Thank you. Welcome. Can I welcome Gareth Powell, Managing Director of Surface Transport at TfL, and Helen Chapman, who's Director of Licensing, Regulation and Charging at TfL. New long title. And welcome back, Helen. I know you're just back from maternity leave, so great to have you here. We're going to kick off looking at legislative reform, and Florence is going to lead on this.
Thank you. Welcome both of you this morning. I'm sure you would have seen the year-long review that the government led on taxi and private hire. I think you were a member of the review, Helen. That's right. Is that correct? And one of the things that came up at our last session in October with the taxi drivers was around this ambiguity around apply for hire. Recommendation 5 of that report states very clearly, as the law stands, applying for hire is difficult to prove and requires significant enforcement resources. And it also states that this definition needs to be reviewed, as well as ensuring that taxis retain the sole right to be held on street to all ranks. What's your view on this definition and this need for legislation?
As Transport for London, we absolutely support there should be a statutory definition. We've been lobbying for it for a number of years. As far back as 2012, we were including it in our response to the Law Commission review on taxi and private hire services. So we absolutely believe there should be a statutory definition. I think initially we used to talk about there being one for applying for hire, but as time has gone on and new technology has entered the industry, we actually think it's really important that there's a statutory definition both of applying for hire and also for pre-booked services, just so that you can make absolutely clear the distinction between the two-tier system.
So what else do you think that TfL should be doing to help the government in terms of making sure that this becomes legislation?
As you say, and sorry, I should have started at the beginning saying that we really welcome the opportunity for being invited to speak to you today about these important points, actually, because we and this particularly has been something, as we say, we've been pushing for a number of years. So we were very keen to be part of the DFT working group. I think we were quite vocal, unlike me, as I'm sure our taxi and private hire stakeholders will attest. We were very vocal through that process. We submitted written evidence, and as part of our response to the working group report, we have offered to join. I think they've suggested it being a panel of regulatory experts that get together to put the definition together, and we've offered to be part of that panel, and would very much welcome the opportunity from government to be allowed to do that.
From a safety perspective, I think one of the things that comes up is the fact that a number of people may feel that TfL isn't carrying out its licensing functions and regulations properly by not properly enforcing it. So where you have instances where taxi drivers are stopping and picking up customers, and regulated taxi drivers, do you think there's a lot more TfL should be doing right now in terms of enforcement?
I think there's always more that can be done, of course, but there are, we've taken significant steps in the last few years, even since the Future Proof review in 2014, to enhance and increase our compliance and enforcement capability. So as part of the Mayor's Action Plan, we've significantly increased the number of compliance officers, but as well as that, and working in conjunction with the trade through our regular engagement sessions, we've really taken a different approach to enforcement through, it's much more intelligence-led capability and enforcement now. So, we will respond to where there are reports of specific non-compliant behaviour. We will take action in the future. We're looking to increase the number of prosecutions that we do. And I'm sure you won't have missed the action that we took against quite a large operator, which was last year and has obviously been through the courts this year. So, yes, I'm sure there is more that can be done. But I do think that we've taken significant steps in our approach to enforcement and compliance, and particularly in our engagement with the trades around it.
And just referring back to the last session around safety, I think the key thing that comes up is around safety and workers' rights. And again, as the licensing authority, do you think there's a lot more TfL should be doing around any new firms that are coming forward to be licensed? Maybe a TfL accredited charter for those firms which actually demonstrate that, yes, they're going to be looking at safety of passengers and workers' rights. Is that something that TfL should be looking at for the future?
I think it is a complex area, actually. So our powers are to regulate for safety reasons. So any regulations that we do implement, there needs to be a very clear link to safety around it. But we do understand the trade's frustration, particularly, obviously James and Steve have spoken very well about workers' rights and about the impact of that. Is there more from a regulatory perspective? Well, we're certainly looking. So we published a policy statement earlier this year around ride sharing, which I know was sort of touched on towards the end of the previous session. We have been working with operators that want to offer ride sharing services in London. We don't have the powers to restrict them from operating. Ride sharing is permitted under the Transport Act and always has been, or has been since 1985. So it's about working with the operators to implement conditions that make that ride sharing safe. And again, something I picked up from the previous session is around training, and we do believe that operators, particularly in ride sharing circumstances, should be offering more safety, more training, more support to drivers, so that they know, if there's two
I appreciate that. I'm pushing specifically on TfL is the licensing authority.
Yes.
We have the decision whether or not to license those firms.
I think the challenge here, Florence, is that we can only carry out our licensing and regulation functions within the framework, the legislative framework that we have. I was listening, very carefully to the really good evidence given in the previous session, and you can absolutely see the issues in the marketplace as described in the previous session around workers' conditions, around the ideas around minimum fares and so on, and wages. The fact is that Transport for London doesn't have the ability to regulate fares in the private hire industry. That isn't something that we're able to do. We are very keen to support to make sure that there are good working conditions for drivers in the industry. And the methods for which we have to do that is working with operators at the moment, because we haven't got the precise legislative framework necessary to be able, for example, to take enforcement action against conditions that were given. So it's something that we're very keen to look at, we're very keen to explore, we're very keen to work with government where they need to bring forward, particularly on working hours, where we think there is a direct relationship to safety there, and we really do want government to be able to give powers to licensing authorities to be able to deal with those issues. But at the moment, that isn't something that we can directly enforce in the way that you're asking for.
Is there, Gareth, a way, aside from your legal responsibilities and before the government legislates, which, you know, could be some time,
Hope not.
could you, as TfL as a body, with the Mayor, work on your own charter, like you have London Living Wage accreditation, that you could say, in separate to your legal requirements, that we will, you know, if an operator guarantees these 10 things, they will get a bronze. If they guarantee these 15, so actually look at how you raise the standards using your other powers rather than your technical legal powers. Is that something you could consider and would consider?
Absolutely. I mean, that would be a great suggestion for us to look at. I mean, we have been very careful to ensure that there is a distinction, exactly as you suggest, between the things that we can require under our powers, because they are regularly tested in court action by interested parties, as you understand. If there's more that we can do to set out unenforceable, or indeed, you know, kind of standards that customers can see, you know, standards that we really want to promote that is outside of our actual regulatory enforcement tools, then absolutely we can consider doing this.
Yeah, that would be great, because I've got that in the TfL's response to the DFT report. It states that Helen Chapman supported this as a common sense approach, and in her response raised the possibility of TfL proposing additional requirements on its licensees, including enhanced training standards and requirements to safeguarding workers' rights. So it would be good if we could see something that TfL would propose going forward in the future.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll pick that up. I think we are concerned that there's a race to the bottom, and it's how, obviously you've got your legal thing, but how can TfL as a good body and the Mayor of London look to drive up standards?
You recognise that?
Yeah. David, next section.
Yeah, thank you. If I could, Joe, I just want to ask a couple of quick questions on the difference between applying for hire and pre-booking. And, you know, the market's changed rapidly because of the growth of app operators. Do you consider app operators to be applying for hire or pre-booked?
They're pre-booked.
They're pre-booked. And to be pre-booked, does an operator have to have a live 24-hour telephone line in operation so that customers can call them if they want to?
Well, so you're probably aware that we did implement that as a requirement, which was legally challenged. That went through court. We went through the Court of Appeal with it, and you know, we won. So that has now been implemented. So operators do need to have a way of a passenger being able to get in contact with them by the telephone if they require.
So all of your licensed operators now have a 24-hour, every single one? Okay.
Yes.
And does an operator have to take the booking in this country? Would it be, you know, thinking, for example, about Uber, there's Uber London, and they have a parent company, Uber BV, which is based in the Netherlands. Would Uber London, which I believe is your operator, you've given an operating license to them, would they have to take the booking, or would it be legal or illegal if Uber BV took a booking instead of Uber London?
So the and forgive me because I've just returned from maternity leave. So some of this is I'm trying to replace this with nursery rhymes.
We've all been there, Helen.
Purple monkeys and bubblegum trees. That's all I'm going to say. So the bookings need to be held at the London Operating Centre. So I don't want to get into the specifics about talking about individual operators, but for all operators, the requirement is that the bookings are held at the operating centre, which is in London.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks. So I just wanted to clarify that before I move on to my main section. I'm going to ask you on is on the Mayor's action plan. And obviously, he put together the taxi and private hire action plan in 2016. What do you see as the successes and failures of that plan so far? And is there any plan to make another plan, if you like? Is it going to be? Is there going to be a new taxi and private hire action plan launched to update the previous one?
Well, no, I think the items in the action plan will still remain valid today, and we have implemented a number of those items. So the English language requirement, which of course I understand there are differing views on, and you've just heard some evidence on that. There's the card payment requirement for taxis, which has been implemented for quite some time. So there are a number of items within the action plan that have been delivered or are on track to be delivered. So there was quite a big consultation that we held earlier this year, which closed on the 25th of June. And we are analysing, we had over 5,000 responses to that. We're analysing those responses, but within that it contained a number of items that are in the Mayor's action plan.
One of the things that was said in the previous panel was about the English test, that there was no one, not many people were asking for an English test. I would personally disagree. I think it's very important that all taxi and private hire drivers are fluent in English. And what is the standard of the English test that you are implementing in terms of the EU standards? I don't know if you're aware, A1, B1,
so it's
C1,
level,
those systems.
So level B1 is the standard required for the English language test across 4 facets. So speaking, listening, reading and writing. And just to put it into context, level B1 is approximately age 11 standard. What we are saying is that anybody, there are a number of exemptions actually from having to sit the test. So if anybody sat for example, a GCSE, not necessarily in English, it could be a GCSE in geography, but that we would accept that as evidence. And actually on our website there's a number of things that we would accept as evidence, but the standard is sort of early secondary school level. And the written element of the test is approximately 100 words. What we recognise, and I think we've publicly announced, is that we do understand that writing a comprehension or a short piece on the planet Mars isn't necessarily relevant to being a private hire driver. Well, not yet anyway, who knows in the future. And so we are working with the providers to bespoke the written element of the test to make it very relevant to being a private hire driver.
You mentioned B1 standard is lower intermediate. You just mentioned age 11. I mean, surely if someone is dealing with customers, they need a higher level. They need to be fluent, especially in their spoken and listening English, because they need to be able to interact with anyone that they come into contact with. I mean, maybe you could say B1 for written English, but surely spoken and listening, speaking and listening needs to be of a higher level. So, I mean, I would certainly support you in, making the tests as stringent as possible to ensure that, all taxi and private hire drivers are fluent in English. I mean, what are you going to, make sure that everyone is fluent in speaking at least?
Well, we test everybody on their ability across the 4 aspects, and I can only speak for from experience of 11-year-old children. I think they are very, very fluent. We having looked at the different testing levels, and we spent quite a bit of time doing that before we implemented the test. We felt that level B1 was the appropriate one. On the written and the reading side, yes, drivers might not have to communicate in writing with a passenger on every single journey. But for example, the compliance team, if they issue a stop notice to a vehicle on street, they are generally handing a letter to the driver. The driver needs to be able to understand the content of that letter and take action. For example, if they are, if the vehicle's been removed from service, which is clearly a safety-related item.
I think, David, that we remember here that we're not trying to take past judgment on a level of customer service or something. What we're really trying to do is to look at the level required for safety. And so, everybody will have a view on the different levels that might be required. B1 is the one that the team found to be the basic level, the minimum level required for communication for people in the event of an emergency. So there are obviously different aspirations for different standards. We are also sympathetic to the fact that this is an industry that does need to be open to a wide number of people to be able to come and do and to be able to fulfil this role in London. So we have to take everything into account.
Well, I understand your position. Okay, I understand your thoughts on this. One of the things I think was in the action plan was about hire and reward insurance, and possibly bringing in the need for operators to have fleet insurance, because then that would solve the issue of people getting hire and reward insurance and then ditching it after a couple of weeks and then just getting on-off insurance or a level of insurance that doesn't properly cover them for accidents. What's the situation on that at the moment?
So you're probably aware, so we included that in the consultation that closed in June. As I say, we've had quite a large response to that consultation, so we are still analysing the responses. Insurance is quite a complex area. I mean, the Motor Insurance Bureau effectively are the backstop for insurance if somebody doesn't have the right level of insurance. So from a passenger safety perspective, they are covered because there is an insurance in place, whatever that looks like. So currently the requirement is for hire and reward insurance at all times when undertaking private hire bookings. We've explored that through the consultation, including fleet insurance and whether that would be appropriate for operators, but we haven't yet taken a decision, and I haven't reviewed the individual consultation responses.
I absolutely understand that's the requirement, and it's a good requirement to have, but in practice it's not always happening that way because people are circumventing the rules, and doing what they're not supposed to be doing. So, fleet insurance would be a way of ensuring that individual drivers cannot circumvent those rules, because you can make the operators have the fleet insurance. And I think this is something that a lot of people in the trade have offered as a solution. I think it's a very, very good solution. So I hope that you do take that on board and implement it. It's obviously there under consultation and discussion. The issue of safety has come up, and particularly I think we're talking about a lot of private hire drivers who don't have anywhere to stop, maybe driving around for many, many hours a day. And also there's the issue of looking at apps and phones, which can obviously distract drivers and then cause accidents. What are you going to do to cut down on that problem?
Well, clearly, private hire driver, like any other driver, needs to comply with legislation when using a handheld device. That legislation obviously applies to everybody and is set nationally. So it's really important that that is the case and that they are able to do so. Clearly, we have to, and it's unfortunate, in many ways that the speed of legislation is very, very hard to keep up with the latest innovation in technology, as you know. And as was said before in the previous session, there has been a huge amount of change in a relatively short period of time in this industry. We are keen to enforce the very highest standards of safety within the regulatory powers that we have. And we're very keen to make sure that is the case, whether that is in the black taxi trade, in private hire and so on, to make sure that we really do have very high standards of safety. So, the straight answer is any rule that applies to anyone driving a vehicle in terms of the use of handhelds must be complied with by somebody using a vehicle who happens to be a private hire driver.
So should they be stationary if they touch their screen or look at their screen?
Well, I'm not a
or take it, take a
lawyer.
booking. If someone's moving and they're touching their screen and looking at it, they're not concentrating on the road. So should they be stationary every time they take a booking?
And absolutely, in the same way that you might be looking at your radio or you might be touching a touch screen on your sat nav and so on. There are a variety of different models that are available in vehicles and for handhelds at the moment. We can only do what the law allows us to do, and the law in this area is set, in terms of needing to be a properly handheld device and fixed and so on and so forth. But the application of that is a matter for the criminal process actually.
So if someone is not stationary when they are touching a handheld device or looking at it, then that's a criminal matter. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not an expert in the application of that. I'm the managing director for Surface Transport and Transport for London. What I'm saying to you is we apply the same standards as everybody else does because it is a police matter if somebody is using a handheld device inappropriately while at the wheel of a vehicle, and rightly so because it's a safety issue.
Well, I haven't heard you say yes or no, but that's take it as that's your the answer you want to give.
David, straightforwardly, that's because I don't know every circumstance tested by law in this area. I mean, I'm being honest with you because all I'm really trying to say from a TfL perspective, we are very keen to improve safety standards, and this is a matter that is controlled by law for everybody. And I'm absolutely adamant that the use of handheld devices in vehicles on our roads, when it is not done in accordance with legislation, is not safe and should not happen.
Well, I'll take that as that's your answer. Okay. Well, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Can I just pick? I've got other members wanting to come in. Let me just pick up the ranks action plan. Are we going to get an update on that? And can you also pick up in that evidence that I've seen that some of the new Crossrail stations, boroughs, are blocking having taxi ranks outside? I think particularly from memory it was Ealing and places are saying no to having a taxi rank outside these new stations.
So the taxi ranks action plan, no doubt it is in my notes somewhere, but I believe we've now exceeded the 100 taxi ranks by some margin, but we can provide the figures to you. So the target was to increase the number by 100 by 2020. So we've already increased over the 100. We're still some time to go between now and 2020. Obviously, the work doesn't stop. We'll continue to work and deliver more and more taxi ranks. And we work very closely with the taxi trade on that. They have a cab ranks committee, and we make sure that we attend every month. And we try to help them, and they help us get some impetus behind getting the road space. In terms of the Crossrail ranks, it's something I've just been made aware of, obviously just returning to work. So we are working, so 20 of the 30 Crossrail stations do have taxi ranks or plans for taxi ranks. We're working to look at where would be appropriate to put taxi ranks at the remaining Crossrail sites. And also the trade has raised some concerns about plans on some of the 20 for exactly where the rank will go. So I think there's a piece of work that we need to do, including engaging with the trade around it, just to work out exactly how do we put these in places that are optimum for the public.
And I think, if I may, that it's really important that we do have good taxi rank provisions around stations, particularly Crossrail stations, a brand new piece of infrastructure. It is going to be a railway that's fully accessible. It's very important, therefore, that taxi ranks are located in areas that maintain that accessibility, and one of the great features of our black taxis are that they are accessible vehicles. Not in all cases, as you know, is it a Transport for London road that is proximate to where those stations are. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the borough. We work really hard with them to get provision. We haven't got there on, as Helen says, 10 of the stations, but we're very keen to make sure that that is the case.
Thank you. And I've seen Sean, then Gareth.
Just a quick thing about the apps, and then I want to speak to you about this test. Couldn't you do something about the app in their for them to get an operating licence? So couldn't you just ask them to make the app blank when the vehicle's moving as part of their operating licence?
I think it's obviously an interesting suggestion. I think we'd need to look at that and understand whether that would be overstepping our powers in doing so. But it's certainly something we'll take away.
It's just a suggestion, and I'd argue that, and if you're so het up about how unsafe the apps are, which I happen to agree with, it doesn't feel like it's overstepping your powers. I leave that with you to deliberate. It's just a suggestion. Okay. My next thing is, you talk about this test and you say that it's at the age 11, and that sounds very powerful in the room because, you know, 11, but I have an 11-year-old child who can more than enough communicate to drive a cab. It's just that her feet couldn't reach the pedals at this point. I wonder, is anybody focusing on what the reality is to be a cab driver and what you're actually going to be doing on a day-to-day basis? And the real point is that a lot of cab drivers who've been cab drivers for many, many years simply wouldn't have the sort of the academic prowess to do a GCSE, but will certainly be able to drive a cab and communicate properly as they've been doing for years. It just strikes me we're picking all of these, you know, academic tests that the likes of us who have done them feel are easy, but actually, what are they going to do to people who are in the trade and have been in the trade for years?
So I think that's it's a very interesting challenge, and I understand. I think when I was sort of saying about the GCSE, it's more about if somebody has done a GCSE and there are a number of other exemptions in the past, then they don't have to sit the test. But the test itself is absolutely being reviewed to look at making it more relevant to being a private hire driver. As you say, there's certain circumstances that a private hire driver will come into every day, none of which involve being on the surface of Mars, but all of which involve potentially conversations about fare transactions, about locations, about a particular route. About a particular train to catch. So we're looking at the test to make it more relevant to that, which obviously will ensure that anybody undertaking the test will be more in their comfort zone about doing it. It's an interesting point. I think we sort of heard from the first panel about grandfather rights and things, but actually when we've looked into that wouldn't be fair. There's a sort of proportion argument, and the fairness in saying anybody who's already a driver is exempt versus anybody new coming into the industry. That's not the way that you can regulate from a safety perspective. It's vital that we have the English language requirement from a safety perspective, and therefore it's relevant that everybody that is in the industry either has to demonstrate they can meet the standard or go through a test in order to be able to do it.
I think your point on grandfathering is quite a strong pushback on that. But I'm just making a plea to make sure that the test is relevant. Because I use my local mini cab. I had a conversation with him. He couldn't pass a GCSE, but he's very competent. He knows where he's going. He's telling me what he's doing. Nothing has happened that would make me feel unsafe about getting in his car. And I don't want a test that prevents this man from working just because it makes us feel better.
Yes, that agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you for that.
Quite good reassurance there. Gareth, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it's again on testing. The issues that I'm going to raise won't be unfamiliar to you, Helen, because they're related to the meeting we had with the Mayor actually before you went on maternity leave.
Yes.
So some time ago. And it's around the practicalities of administering the test. So I don't think anyone around this room, and we heard from the trade unions earlier on, and from other private hire representatives, everyone accepts that there needs to be an English language requirement. There's no problem with that. The issue, as you're very well aware, is predominantly around the written test. But the way the test is administered, of course, there are only a handful of testing centres in London. I think it's 2 or 3. It takes travel time to get there. You have to miss work to do it. It costs hundreds of pounds every time you have to sit the test. One of the main problems is that the PHV drivers who fail the test fail one element of it, which is invariably the written test. I've seen figures that show that disproportionately it's the written test that they fail. When they resit it, they have to do the whole lot, which means they have to take out just as much time as if they're doing the entire exam. And that was the issue that was raised, or one of the issues that was raised in that meeting. Has that changed since then?
Well, so I think the first thing is I'm making a note for myself that we provide up-to-date figures of the pass rate of the test, because it's a while since I looked at it. It was about 3 or 4 months ago, but the pass rate of the test was quite high. So we will provide a breakdown of the pass rate of the individual facets of the test. So as you know, through that meeting that we had, it is important to us to review the way the test is being delivered and the content of the test, while still maintaining the level B1 standard, which we think is the appropriate standard. So we have been doing some work looking around the options of whether we deliver the assessment in a very different way. We haven't come to any conclusions on that yet, but it's one of the reasons why we made an announcement back in June, I think it was, that we were going to be delaying the implementation date. So it's April, end of April next year that we now implement it. So there is still a bit of time for us to make sure, and actually to engage and communicate with the trade around it and understand how best to implement it that works for the trade as well as
So what is your thinking at the moment then? Because there are 4 elements to the test, aren't there?
Yes.
If you fail one, why should you have to resit the 3 that you've passed?
So that's something I think I need to take away and look at and provide an update on, if that's okay, Chair.
May well be something we might want to put into our report in any case, depending that actually you do things as modules, don't you? If you don't get through one module, and there's the cost and everything Gareth's highlighted as part of your reviewing this test.
And we are reviewing it now, so those recommendations will be really welcome.
Yes, yeah. Lovely, great. Thank you for that. Let's move on and look at the subject of traffic congestion. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously we've heard there's huge numbers of private hire vehicles on the roads. They've gone up since about 2009-10 from about 59,000 to in the order of 114,000 by 2017-18. Whereas the number of taxi drivers has remained stable at about 24,000. So obviously there's a suggestion that there's many more cars on the road, possibly contributing to making bus ridership less attractive because the buses are slower. So you have been consulting on removing the congestion charge exemption from private hire vehicles. And I just wonder what feedback you've had on that consultation and whether you're still pursuing that option.
So that was, as you say, we have consulted on that. We are reviewing the responses to that. We don't have a conclusion from those. I haven't seen the responses myself. But as you know, that consultation was based on the congestion and air quality implications within the congestion charge zone for the situation that you described, yes.
Now, obviously, technology is just changing London streets massively. We've got apps that can help you avoid congestion, things like Waze. Everyone has a sat-nav, so everyone has access to a sat-nav if they want it on their phone. So the advantage that taxi drivers have by doing the knowledge starts to be put slightly into jeopardy, because one of the solutions that local authorities are bringing in order rightly to stop rat running through residential areas is changing the road layout and filtering streets so that the through traffic stays on the main roads. And we've got some really good examples, like in Waltham Forest, where we're beginning to see really excellent health benefits and increases in active travel. What this means is, as more of London becomes filtered, and as which rightly it needs to happen, because we've got so much more rat running through residential areas because everyone can do it. These apps are sending people through residential areas inappropriately. Doesn't that mean that Transport for London needs to think about congestion and congestion charge exemptions? Doesn't that sort of put extra pressure on you to be getting this right?
Well, so to answer the general point first, I mean, clearly one of the things that we have to deal with is both the advance of technology and also congestion on our roads. And our policies on roads in general are to make sure that they are, they strike the right balance between all the users of the road network, and of course to make sure that they are as safe as possible for those people that live, work and use them. I think on your more specific point about congestion, apps, filtering and the knowledge, we've been very clear, and Helen can elaborate more on this, that the knowledge is a preeminent qualification. It is something, I myself have been to observe, the knowledge exams in process. I mean, it is astounding the information that taxi drivers are able to absorb and retain, and therefore the quality of route planning and service planning that they're able to provide to their customers. So we're absolutely very keen to preserve that knowledge test and the relevance of it going forward.
Of course, it's an astonishing thing, the knowledge. But
we're going to come on to that next.
So we're coming on to that later. But the point is that these technological changes are interrupting that. But I'll move on and get back to how you're dealing with the congestion practically. Have you thought about having a licence cap similar to what they did in New York in London?
So we've obviously been following the New York story with interest, and we speak to New York quite regularly. So I think it's very good that you are going to be talking to them. We don't have the legal powers within London to put a cap on numbers. It's something we've been calling for a number of years, and again, as part of that Department for Transport working group, it's something we've made very clear throughout the process. So we're very pleased to see that it is become a recommendation from the DFT working group. We look forward with interest to the government's response to that. It does need to be done in conjunction with putting a resolution in for cross-border hiring, because if you do pass legislation to allow a cap in London but don't fix the cross-border hiring issue, then of course all that happens is you get lots of out-of-town vehicles come in. So for us, those two solutions go hand in hand. We welcome any work from from the Assembly to help keep the pressure on so that we can get those items delivered and be able to implement a cap in London.
And solving the cap and the cross-border hiring, do you have a timescale on where you have, is the government working on this? What kind of timescale are you looking at to get any kind of resolution on those issues?
So, sadly, it's not in our gift to give them a timescale, but the working group report, we are expecting a government response from it very soon. And actually, I understand that a Westminster Hall debate has been secured for 2:30 this afternoon to talk about the DFT working group report, which is probably the first opportunity for us to understand the steer from the Minister on how they intend to take this forward.
And are you looking at any other options, things like road pricing or geofencing, to kind of mean that people are operating in particular areas rather than all going for the honeypots in the very centre?
Well, there's clearly, as technology moves on, there's the potential in the future to be able to adopt all manner of different things. At present, we just keep a sort of a view on the available technology at the moment. As you'll no doubt be aware, the Mayor's Transport Strategy sets out a commitment for Transport for London to keep such options under review and to make sure we understand what available technology might be there and what might be able to be deployed. We don't have any firm proposals that we've brought forward nor we consulted on yet to do that, but in the future there may be the potential for technology to assist in the way that you described.
So you think it could, that kind of road pricing technology could be helpful in terms of managing congestion?
Well, there's all sorts of options that might be available in the future, absolutely. I think what we have to do at the moment is to understand what that technology is, then to work out what the impact of using it might be, what the case for it might be doing, and then, if necessary, bring forward some policies and consultation. We're a long way away from any of that, but certainly there is, there's an obligation on us and something we want to do, which is to keep a very close watch on what technology can provide for.
Thank you. Obviously, the recent consultation, you said you're still considering all the responses. When do we expect to get a response from you and details of what you are going to implement?
Well, I hope very soon. I need to, a precise date I don't have in my mind because it's run by my city planning colleagues, as you know. But I hope very soon we'll be able to give that outcome. I do know there were an awful lot of responses that came in, and we're working through them at the moment.
Just be helpful for us to know, because obviously we're producing our report, whether we can get it out ahead of that or whether actually we need to wait for that to influence it. So
why don't I go and find out, and then we can get back to you.
Be helpful, just timing wise, yeah.
Sure, we're happy to do that.
That would be great, thank you. Right, let's move on to looking at entry requirements for drivers again, and this obviously picks up the knowledge point. Sean?
I think some of these points we've already covered, so I don't think it should take as long as maybe we'd envisaged. But are you content that the entry requirements for both trades are currently fit for purpose? We've obviously had a discussion about the English language test, but let's maybe focus on this advanced driving test, how that's going to work, the cost that's going to put on drivers. Much of the complaint has been that these new measures have been brought in to deal with new big players and actually are crushing small regional businesses. What would your response be to that?
I mean, in short, the answer is yes. We are content. We are regulating for public safety reasons, so it is important for us to be able to assess and make sure that anybody applying to enter the industry is fit to do so and is not risking passenger safety when we do that. We are mindful, of course, to the impacts on the industry. Anything that we are looking to implement from a regulatory perspective, we undertake detailed integrated impact assessments on. As you know, there's been several legal challenges that we have been dealing with over the last few years, and on each of those legal cases we have put forward a case to the court, and the judge has agreed with our position. So yes, we do believe that we should be looking to enhance the regulation. Historically, with the private hire industry, I think when licensing was first introduced, there was quite a light touch approach to the legislation. And that was predominantly to encourage as many drivers as possible to become licensed. It's now a maturing industry and a very changing industry, and it's right that we look at it on a regular basis to make sure that it is meeting the needs of passengers from a safety perspective. And if I may just touch on the knowledge, we're very proud of the knowledge of London. They are the best and most qualified taxi drivers in the world. We have regulators from all over the world that come either to see how we run the knowledge or to understand more about it or want to speak to us on the phone. And we do still very firmly believe in the knowledge and believe that it is right and appropriate for taxi drivers in London. There's more that we think that we can do, so we have been looking to try and get accredited, the knowledge accredited by Ofqual. Discussions with Ofqual have taken some time, but they do remain ongoing. And we've had a knowledge workshop, if you like, with the taxi trade much earlier this year. I think it's about at the right time that we get back together with them again to talk about other ways of promoting it and making it attractive for people.
Knowledge notwithstanding, what was probably the biggest bar to becoming a taxi driver is the cost of the new cab. If you speak to any taxi driver, it's horrifically expensive. That's just a personal opinion. What more can be done to help taxi drivers with that thing? Because the knowledge is not as big a bar to my mind as the cost of the new cab.
No, and I can understand that. It is, we do recognise the investment that taxi drivers are making. So the cost of the cab is about £56,000, I think, with government grants and things. There is another taxi that we are hoping will launch either later this year, although there's not much time left this year, so maybe early next year. I think just having at least two manufacturers in the industry helps to drive competition.
Sorry to interject. Do we have any idea that this cab will actually be cheaper?
I'm not sure that they've officially announced what the pricing model of the taxi will be yet. So that's something I need to take away and check.
I just make the point that if it isn't significantly cheaper, we need a plan B, that's within our gift, rather than hoping that we have a generous manufacturer waiting in the wings, which I doubt.
No, I understand, and I think you know, so there are grants that we've secured for taxi drivers. If there are any recommendations, I mean, it's something that we continually keep under review. We want as many taxi drivers as possible to move over to the new clean green vehicles rather than driving the older, most polluting vehicles. So while we continue to keep that under review, obviously if there are any recommendations from the Assembly and from the Transport Committee, then we would really welcome those and give them very serious consideration.
I'll forget to. And when we talk about something that also interests me is this thing about accurate fare estimates. How does that work? So, because in my notes here it says that for private hire vehicles, you've brought in the English language requirement, that they must have the ability to be able to speak, etc. And it says in here accurate fare estimates. What are you doing to help minicabs, I suppose would be the word, give accurate fare estimates? Because that would be pretty useful to the public, I imagine.
Yes, so it is a requirement that they do now need to provide fare estimates. I believe that's where a customer requests it, but again, that might just be because I've got a few months away from it. I think we can take that away and I can provide more evidence.
I would like that because from a customer's point of view, an accurate fare estimate would be great because making up prices on the fly is offensive and dangerous. My last point. We've touched upon this about retrospective testing around the English test and all the rest of that, and I think your answer was fairly robust. But what about this thing about the improved driving standards? What evidence do you have that this is a good or a bad thing? Are these minicabs crashing into trees every 2 minutes and we need to lift that standard? Or again, is it an artificial bar?
It's certainly not designed to be an artificial bar at all. So we haven't taken a decision yet on whether to implement an advanced driving test because we are still reviewing the consultation responses. Should we decide that we are going ahead with it, then obviously any evidence that we've collated through the consultation and through the integrated impact assessment that we also produced and consulted on will be taken into account while we to help us determine how best to implement it, who it should apply to, and what timescale in which to implement it in.
I just make the suggestion. People driving the public around should probably be the best drivers in a test, maybe the way they do that. One last point. If this is all really about public safety, how well are we doing on DBS checks? How well are we doing on reporting incidences to the police, to TfL? How well are we doing on TfL pressing down on licence holders who are not doing these things or have a poor record?
So in terms of DBS checks, that's actually run by an agency on behalf of the Home Office. So it's not something TfL does. We require a DBS check, but actually, in reality, the driver goes to another agency to obtain the DBS check. We then, because we require an enhanced check, we review the results and make a licensing decision. So in terms of operators reporting potential incidents, alleged incidents that have been brought to their nature, I think anybody that saw the evidence that I gave in court in June won't be surprised to know that it is actually quite very important to us, and we aren't scared to take action where we feel an operator is failing in their obligation, whether it's a common sense obligation or actually a legal obligation to do so.
Have you removed any licences because of this?
We refused a licence of a very large operator, not purely for this point, I should make clear. Actually, there were a number of reasons. But if any other operator is brought to our attention for a similar thing, then of course we would consider what licensing action is appropriate.
The final thing I'll say, refusing a licence is, if that's necessary, is a great thing to do. But really, where the poor standard is normally delivered is once you've got your licence, you let it slip. The important piece of the public would probably be enforcement. And I just leave that with you, how
That's right,
your best way
and
around
we
that.
have published guidance. In September this year, we published guidance to help operators make a decision about how they should report and what type of things they should report to the police as well.
Thank you, that's enough for me.
Florence, quick
Just
question.
really quickly on some of the costs associated to the new taxis and existing taxis. And again, we touched on the fact that some of the stations on the new Crossrail has been ensuring that they are open for taxi ranks. The reality is a lot of disabled people do rely on black taxis because they are wheelchair accessible, and some taxis I know had the intercom and the hearing loop for people who have hearing impairments. So they do play a valuable role for a number of Londoners who rightly should be able to go out and about. But on the fact that the new taxis, the new electric ones, which are fantastic, I have test driven it. They have not only the ramp, they've got a step up to it as well, and a little swervy chair, really, really great. But it's a lot of money. And the de-licensing scheme from TfL is up to £5,000. That's still a small proportion. Do you have the data on how many taxi drivers have taken up that, and how many have accessed the grant that you talked about? If you don't have it now, that's fine, but...
So we can definitely provide that. The last time I checked, which is a few weeks ago, I think it was approximately 120 taxi drivers had used the de-licensing scheme, but we'll confirm it. And for that reason, for all the reasons that you've just said, we do think it's appropriate that we look at the de-licensing scheme and make sure that it is doing what it's set out to achieve. Because we think there are changes that we can make to it to make it more attractive to drivers. So we haven't come to any decisions on that yet. And again, if there's any suggestions, then they would be very welcomed, so that we can make the best use of that money to help taxi drivers.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Let's look at enforcement now seamlessly. Joanne?
I think we're going out on a site visit
We
shortly to see how you do it. But when we did our report a couple of years ago, Future Proof, we did say at that stage that for an industry of the size it is, the resources put into enforcement were astoundingly low. Now since then you've made significant changes, particularly in the number of compliance officers. But could you just give us your feeling at the moment as to whether you think you have enough resources in terms of staff and the time they have to carry out effectively all the necessary enforcement and compliance?
So we've taken, as you say, we've managed to recruit a significant additional number of compliance officers. We have found that the enforcement activity that they're carrying out is very effective. We've seen some increasing compliance rates as we've gone forward there. We are absolutely trying to ensure that their enforcement activity is targeted and most effective to make the greatest contribution to make sure that everything is safe. So we're confident at the moment that the amount of resource that we have is the right amount of resource, and that they are doing some very effective enforcement activity. As we referred to earlier, we are ensuring also that we make this enforcement activity as far as possible intelligence-led, so where we do get either complaints from members of the public or we get other information from other sources, we're directing our enforcement activity to make sure that it's really targeted at the areas that are going to make the most difference. But at the moment, we are confident we have a good amount of resource for the size of the trade and the scale of the issues we need to deal with.
Thank you. And I think since May this year, your compliance officers have got extra powers, and that they're having training. How many of your officers have actually received the training yet, or if you don't know that, could you give us that?
We'll give you that. I mean, the powers you refer to are actually the ability to be able to stop and direct traffic, which of course you can imagine is very important, because they are able then to, in a real-time situation, to be able to stop and pull over a vehicle in order to be able to carry out checks at the roadside in a safe location. That has proved to be extremely usul for us.
I think figures about...
It's 109.
Is it?
Yes.
109, or you've
109,
got 332 thereabouts. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So, and when do you think all your compliance officers will be trained in those new powers?
We don't have to have every single compliance officer, because as you'll find out when you come and see, you need somebody with the right powers to be able to stop and direct traffic, and then you have teams who are able to carry out the conversations with drivers and so on. So there is a proportion that we need to go to, but we don't need to have everybody at that level.
Lovely. If you could give further details, that would be good. And also, if you could provide some details about how many drivers they've actually taken off the road.
Yeah, we
and
can do
sort
that.
of their activities, that would be really
We'll do
useful.
that, yeah.
And I know there's concern about cross-border working and whether your compliance officers, well, they don't have the powers over licensed vehicles coming in out of London. Could you just give us an indication about some of the issues you face and really what you're trying to lobby for and how this committee could help you do that?
So the issue actually is twofold. So any driver that is licensed by any authority can work wholly or predominantly in another authority in the way that the legislation is set out, and that can't be what it was intended to do. So some of the issues that come up is your drivers will license shop. If there's particular issues or a particularly high bar for them to meet with one licensing authority, at the moment there's nothing to stop them going and choosing an authority with lower standards. And that's particularly been the case in Rotherham and areas like that. So at the moment we aren't seeing a significant increase in drivers licensed elsewhere coming into London. The issue is happening the other way around, and that's we presume, and from talking to the industry, predominantly because we're one of the few licensing authorities that's got the dedicated licensing department, where end-to-end time for getting your licence is probably quite swift when you compare it with some of the smaller authorities. So there's an issue with licence shopping. There's an issue with compliance and enforcement, because any licensed London vehicle that's elsewhere obviously can't be enforced against by the local authority, so they then call on us for help, and the same would happen vice versa. And there's a general view that a journey should either start or end in the area for which a vehicle is licensed. So, as well as lobbying government on this, which we've been doing for quite a few years, we've also written quite a detailed policy paper around it, and explored the different options for fixing cross-border hiring, and we're certainly, I think it would be helpful if we shared that paper with you, for you to read, because we've really explored the pros and cons of different options prior to coming up with a recommendation that the journey should start or end.
I think if you could find any figures about drivers your officers have stopped but haven't been able to enforce against, that would be really useful.
See if we find something.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely, thank you for that. Right, I'm going to move on to ride sharing now, and I wanted to ask, I know you touched on this earlier, Helen, how has TfL really responded to the regulatory issues posed by this kind of emergence, this new kind of service? On one hand, you can argue environmentally it's more sound, and others there are obviously safety concerns. So what are you doing or should you be doing to potentially support these services?
So as I said earlier, it's permitted under the Transport Act, and we do have the powers under that Act to be able to write regulations. And so we published a policy statement in February this year, and in advance of publishing that policy statement, we have actually worked with any operator that's applied to be licensed in London to offer ride-sharing services, to create a set of conditions that would be applicable. And that's really in advance of us undertaking a consultation with specific proposals around regulations and asking for ideas and suggestions around regulations, because as you say, on the one hand there are environmental benefits if the ride-sharing service is operated correctly, but on the other hand there are safety benefits with it. So we intend to go out, the consultation material is almost ready to be published. I can't give you an exact date now, but we do hope to be able to set a date for publishing the consultation very shortly. And that really will be an exercise and an opportunity for us to gather ideas, both from the industry, from people that might engage or be attracted by ride-sharing services, and from other experts so that we can set the regulations at a right level, and obviously undertake an impact assessment to understand the impact to the industry of any regulations that we might set.
You said you've been working with a particular operator, but have you sought any advice from internationally to look at, is there international best practice that you can learn from in this field?
Yes, there is. So we have spoken to colleagues in the States. Ride sharing, I think, is predominantly is more popular actually in some cities in the States. So we have spoken to them, and we'll continue those conversations so that we can learn from each other and factor anything into our consultation or our eventual regulations around it.
And you mentioned passenger safety, which is obviously a really big concern. Are you looking at things like, could there be women-only options, for example? Because that might be something. I'm not saying it's a good idea or not, but it may well be something that some women might prefer if they want to share the ride for a cheaper journey home, but actually don't want to, you know.
And these are all absolutely the ideas that we have thought of and can think of, and we would welcome any contributions in that area, because I think fundamentally this is an issue where the modern technology that allows ride sharing, as you say, has many benefits. What it doesn't allow you to is to take a view on who you might be ride sharing with, in the same way that you might do if you were choosing to share a black taxi somewhere, because you might be physically hailing it with somebody next to you. So there are issues that we want to explore, and any ideas and suggestions would be very welcome.
So issues presumably where you drop off, because someone then knows potentially where you live.
Right.
That's a challenge as well.
And the other side of it that I would highlight is also for the drivers themselves that are undertaking ride-sharing activities, because of the nature of people who don't know each other getting into their vehicles. So both sides of it are important for us to look at.
Obviously came up earlier in the evidence we heard, a huge challenge for drivers if there's a dispute or something going on.
That's right.
And perhaps one for you, Gareth, here. There's clearly an overlap here between ride sharing and this new on-demand bus services that we've heard about. Can you sort of try and clarify how these are both regulated? Because in some ways they would appear at face value to be pretty similar.
So absolutely. So we have a system of regulation that is specific to private hire vehicles that is defined by the number of seats. Above that number of seats, we have something that would be a bus service that comes under bus service regulation. As you know, we have been consulting on and looking at how we bring these common type of customer activity, if I can put it that way, but different vehicle types and different method of providing the service, how we bring all of the activities that TfL are trying to do in both those areas to a common aim. And the regulations under which buses that are not the TfL bus services that apply to do a bus service in London, those regulations really were established and most used for things like the sort of tour buses that you see within central London, and weren't necessarily designed for these types of modern service technologies with larger vehicles, and therefore we want to try and improve both of those things to make sure that to the same aims that we've just talked about in respect of taxi ride sharing.
Thank you. Sean, you wanted to come in here.
Just a small point about ride sharing. Surely any ride sharing service should be at the behest of the driver. Driver should be able to opt out of that. That should be part of the regulations. I may be driving for an operator, but as a driver don't want to partake in ride sharing because of whatever problems. Surely that should be in there as well.
And these are all things that we need to explore through that consultation. So yes, we very much welcome responses to those types of things.
Very good point. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Right, we're going to just ask some questions on Uber now. Obviously, our last meeting, Uber didn't attend. We have got a Dragon's Den afternoon coming up. We've got a number of companies in Uber are on our list, and we hope we'll attend on that day. But Navin.
Well, as we know, 15-month temporary license was issued in June this year, and that was subject to a number of conditions, which included the governance structure, including restrictions on hiring personnel, etc., operational model, any changes in advance and conditions with regards to circumvention of its obligations, requirements to report all data breaches and infringements, and indeed report any enhanced conditions relating to reporting of criminal activity and so on. Question is, what monitoring since the issue of temporary license have you been carried out in terms of compliance activity, and generally give us an update where we are on this, please.
So I think, and this, I appreciate this might be frustrating, but I think I need to sort of preset anything that I say with it's inappropriate for us to talk about individual licensees in any detail. Because there's a legal framework. We took a decision against Uber for what we felt were very valid reasons. We're very pleased that eventually Uber actually agreed that we took the right decision, and the magistrate also agreed that we took the right decision. So they have been through the appeal process. The magistrate was satisfied at the end of that process enough to issue them with a 15-month licence with these additional conditions, as you say. So since they've been licensed by the magistrate, we are aware that there is a judicial review that has just been granted to one of the taxi trade groups, or all of the taxi trade groups. So we'll obviously wait and see the outcome of that judicial review process. But in the meantime, we have, of course, as we would with any operator, been monitoring any specific conditions. That will be through a range of activities, including compliance visits, or us writing to them, and we'll continue to do that for as long as they remain licensed.
I appreciate you have constraints, but at the same time, I mean, can you touch upon some of the aspects of conditions which are pretty onerous? They are very serious, and it is important to see whether from the monitoring that you have done so far, whether there is any change in the culture, which was obviously very questionable, something which I'd like to see how far in public domain you can put, because this is of interest to all concerned.
And I think actually the evidence that we submitted to the court in advance of the hearing is probably quite helpful for me to use here, and we're very welcome to provide that evidence. There has been a significant culture change and governance change in Uber since we took the licensing decision, and when we have put that into our witness evidence. It's now down to Uber to and actually any other operator to make clear that they are serious about meeting the conditions. It's down to us to monitor that, of course, but really it's within their gift to meet all the conditions that have been set upon them by the magistrate.
Let me see if I can get a bit more information, because like I started off, one of the conditions is about changes to the governance structure, which included restrictions on hiring personnel who have been involved in evading previous enforcement efforts. Is there any indication that there is a positive move towards changing that particular procedures?
Well, as I say, I mean, when we took the licensing decision, which is probably a day I'll never forget, back in September last year, I think the initial reaction that we saw from the operator, which was very public, was as expected, or was as they had sort of reacted to any measures or any attempts to regulate in the preceding 5 years. But what we then very quickly saw was quite a shift in the culture. So after their initial reaction, and this is all in my witnessed evidence, but you know, we did see this huge change and culture shift. There are new people within, you know, right at the very top of the organisation, and so the approach to regulation has improved and changed in the run-up to the court case. It's really difficult to talk about the specific conditions that have happened since then, because obviously, you know, whether we have concerns or not, that's a matter for us as a regulator to talk directly with you know, the individual operator about, rather than you know, advising them via a public forum.
Can you tell us anything about reporting of criminal activity and how they manage complaints?
Well, again, so I think there's a lot of evidence that went into the court case around that, and again, you know, we're absolutely willing to share all of that with you. We published a statement, a guidance note, actually, for all operators back in September this year, which provides quite a lot of useful information about how to go about reporting. Of course, as with all operators, we would expect Uber to meet that, and if they don't, then that's something that we would need to consider on a case-by-case basis, regardless of the operator.
Are you able to tell us any areas of concern that you have arising from ongoing inspections and monitoring that you're undertaking?
Well, no, I'd just say, Naveen, I think Helen's said that it is a matter that you know, we regulate a whole series of different operators. You're asking questions about Uber specifically and licence conditions that they operate to, and it's not the place for us to be able to comment specifically on any particular issue in that area. We're very happy to provide you with all of the evidence that Helen gave prior to the magistrate taking the magistrate's decision. That decision itself has been given leave to be challenged judicially. So I don't think you know, as much as I you know, as I can do here, I can't you know, answer your very specific questions on one specific operator. I don't think that's right.
Chair, I think finally it's worth pursuing whether at the end of the process, so to say, let's say we are there in September 2019 when the current temporary license terminates, will you be able to, at that point in time, tell us whether, you know, what the sort of overall outcome is?
Well, yes, I mean, you know, there will be an application in prior to the expiry of any licence, and that's the same for all operators. So at the point at which we receive the application, we will be undertaking a very detailed assessment, as we do with any new or renewal application, before coming to a licensing decision. You know, I've no doubt that certain aspects of that will be relevant for us to make them public. This isn't about trying to be non-transparent or, you know, opaque with you. This is very much about us needing to follow a specific process, because that's our obligation as a regulator to do that.
I'm trying to understand the process. You know, I can see that clear some legal constraints why you can't give us the full story as to, you know, what your findings are. But at the end of the temporary license, what would prevent you from telling us, which is of huge public interest, what the findings are in whole, because that would certainly determine whether you issue the new license or not, which I think normally tends to be 5 years.
That's right. Well, so a normal license would be 5 years. We do actually have the power to issue shorter term licenses if we deem it appropriate to do so, which is the power that the magistrate used in determining issuing a 15-month license. I mean, you know, in terms of whether we issue a new license or not, you know, if we were in a position, having assessed all of the evidence available to us and all of the application to grant a licence, then you can be assured that we would be satisfied that all the regulations and conditions had been met, which is the same with any licence application. We license about 250,000 individual licensees. So, you know, every single one of those licensees goes through a process in order for us to determine whether they are fit and proper. And we grant a licence to only those that we do determine are fit and proper.
If you were to take it that, or if your evidence suggested that there was a clear sort of reason for you to award a new license, would you be seeking any reassurances given the past history of the issues that we've had with this particular service?
Well, we'd look, as we do with everyone, it's very much a case-by-case basis. So, you know, we'd have to consider all the evidence in front of us to determine, one, what our licensing decision would be, but two, whether there should be any additional measures. So, for example, any conditions that we deem it appropriate to attach to the licence, or whether a short-term licence is more appropriate. So there's a number of things within our gift when we get to that point, but it's difficult to talk in theory about it ahead of that event. But, you know, but in general, with all of our licensees, we do have certain discretionary powers that we can use if we do deem them appropriate.
But would all the information pertaining new license, will that be in public domain at the time?
I think it would very much depend, but obviously, you know, we're willing to continue a dialogue with you as to what would be appropriate. You'll be aware from the previous case that we had with Uber, we took the decision to make everything public. We were very conscious that everybody you know, had an opinion or wanted to understand the information. So we took the decision to make all of that information public, and I think it was the right decision to take. And we'll continue to review on a case-by-case basis, not just with Uber, but with any operators, as to what level of information we think is appropriate to put into the public domain.
Yeah, we appreciated that you may not be able to answer our questions fully, but we felt if we didn't ask anything about Uber, the public would rightly be asking why we weren't doing our jobs. So we felt it was important. Right, let's just finish just looking at TfL's capacity. Florence.
Thank you. We touched on issues around enforcement and whether or not there's enough staff members to carry that out. But obviously, TfL's main role is the licence regulator, and for a number of drivers, whether it's private hire or taxi drivers, they do take investment in terms of coming forward, whether it's black taxi drivers, learning the knowledge, and then when they apply, they want to receive their licence in a timely manner so that they can actually go out and work. We've had complaints about the length of time it's been taking TfL to renew licences, which, as you know, will result in taxi drivers not earning any money. And there's also been anecdotal reports about issues around criminal checks taking place. So you look at the rise and expansion of the industry. Do you actually feel that your directorate has enough staffing and resourcing to carry out all your functions properly in a timely manner?
So overall, yes, yes we do. And actually the licensing service, I think, has run very smoothly and been very efficient for a number of years. Until very recently. So over the last few months there has been a blip. I can always tell because I start to get individual emails from drivers that are concerned. So as far as I'm aware, but it is something that we will check, everyone has been licensed by the time their renewal has come up. But it has been quite...
casework.
I'm getting masses of casework on this, absolutely masses. And I have to say it's extremely really annoying because, you know, we then write on behalf of people and it takes a million years to get answers from TfL as well. You know, your members' correspondence is just being, you know, rehashed all over again. But, you know, it's really unfair. This is people's livelihoods. They've applied in really good time. Sorry to get out of my pram. And I have been very silent until now. But, you know, I mean, it's actually incredibly difficult. I've got people writing to me saying, you know, I've literally gotten when we heard very, very eloquent testimony earlier on about how difficult it is to make ends meet, talking about having a living wage, you're talking about an enforced break in people's employment so that you are effectively condemning an entire family to starve. And I'm not exaggerating. I've got some very moving casework about this, and it's very, very upsetting for all of us. And I'm just opening my mouth, I'm sure, on behalf of every single Assembly member around the table and those who are not in the room. You know, this has got to be sorted out. I'm sorry, but it's just unfair. You know, people apply well in advance. What is going on? Why can't you deal with these applications in a timely fashion?
And I take all of those points on board and agree with you. You know, the licensing service, as I say, you know, it's a very recent thing. It's linked, I think, to a large number of renewals that are coming through the system at the same time. We've been looking at the resources. We've been making really great inroads to clear those backlogs. But, you know, we need to move quicker, and we need to make sure that there aren't any occasions where a driver is out of work. So there have been a number of initiatives that we've done over the last few weeks to get that back under control. Since I've been back, so, you know, we have closed the phones for a very small period of time every day, just so we can focus all the resources on processing applications. So there's a number of things that we're doing around it. But if you have member casework and there are drivers that are still out of work, please do contact us immediately, because we will be able to work through those cases.
Again, as the licensing authority, TfL will have the data in terms of when the drivers applied, when their licence is up for renewal. So what is the backlog? Do you have that figure?
So, no, I don't, but I'm very happy to provide that after. This is an area, as I say, you start to see it because an increase in individual emails come through, and obviously casework that's been raised on their behalf. So this is really important to us. We want to get everybody back licensed. If there is anyone that remains out of work, then please do let us know. We've been working with the trade organisations who have been great at raising individual member cases with us, both on the taxi side and the private hire side. So, you know, it's a request for all of those in the room as well. Please do let us know, because we do want to prioritise anyone that's out of work.
Just on that last bit, working with the trades, I think one of the other things that we've heard loud and clear is around the dialogue and engagement with both trades since the ongoing investigations, and again, anecdotal evidence and concerns around which trade groups you meet with, which you don't, how often you meet, who's invited, who's, you know, there seems to be conflicting information at any given time. Yes. So, and I think, you know, a positive and good engagement will help in terms of some of the policies that TfL is trying to produce and adopt, and then get that, and then those trades will help their drivers actually in terms of adhering to that. So has there been any improvement on engagement with the different trades?
Well, I mean, there's a number of engagement forums that take place with the trades. So a far cry, I think, from the Future Proof report back in 2014. So there are quarterly operational meetings, both with the taxi trade and a separate one with the private hire trade. On top of those, there are quarterly strategic meetings that take place at quite a senior level with the General Manager of Taxi and Private Hire. And then on top of that as well, there's a meeting 3 times a year that's either chaired either by TfL's Commissioner or actually by Gareth, who's our Managing Director, and I attend those meetings as well. And then there are numerous ad hoc meetings that take place as well. We attend the Cab Ranks Committee on a monthly basis. There's a specific Heathrow forum that we always make sure that there's TfL representation at, and anything else that the trade ask for.
Again, so, I mean, sorry to interrupt and sorry to suddenly start going on about things in this last session, but, you know, I mean, again, I mean, this will be shocking to you, but taxi drivers are not backward in coming forward. You know, breaking news, taxi drivers express viewpoints. And I hear from a lot of taxi drivers in my constituency on a very regular basis, as I'm sure other members do as well. And, you know, sometimes they don't feel that the forums are being helpful. Effective enough, that they're not being helpful enough, and that there are issues for them around ranking. Heathrow, you've mentioned, that is something that comes up. You know, I think we need to feel really assured as Assembly members that when you tell us that the meetings are taking place, you can tell us about the frequency of the meeting, whether they're quarterly or how often they are. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that they are effective meetings, and that the issues that are being raised by the taxi drivers, or indeed, as I was just talking about, you know, people getting re-registered as private hire drivers and taxi drivers altogether, you know, we need to know that these things are being tackled effectively by TfL. And our casework is, and contacts from people doesn't always give us, you know, a feeling of confidence that that is happening.
So look, our intention is to engage effectively because we want to understand from both trades and the representatives of those trades and representatives of those who work in those trades, you know, how the regulatory activity that we undertake is carried out. We want them to be effective, so therefore we are, you know, keeping them under review. We are very happy to have specific feedback on any particular aspect of that engagement and specific suggestions as to how we might enhance our engagement. We want them to be an effective use of everybody's time in order to have a really good dialogue about the future for the trade.
Can I just ask about things like, I mean, I don't know, I am Tom Copley today, in fact, because I'm substituting for him on this committee, but does this committee, do Assembly members regularly see from the Transport Committee, because I don't think I do, because I'm normally on other committees, the minutes of those meetings and the action points that come out, so that we, you know, so that we can see that, I can see lots of shaking of heads from behind you, actually. Behind you. We're almost in December. We're almost in December. I mean, I would like to know that they're effective by looking at the action points and seeing that there's tracking going through from something that comes up at one meeting, whether the next meeting is, you know, bi-monthly or quarterly or every 6 months, that we could see that that's being tracked through. So we do. Maybe there's something we can do to help you make them more effective.
So we do, we absolutely do. We take notes of the meetings, we publish those notes online, and all the action points from the meetings are also published online. The notes are shared with the trade representatives prior to us publishing them to make sure they're content with the notes prior to us putting them up online on the website. So that was implemented about 2 years ago. So if there's suggestions for more that we should be doing, then of course we're happy to listen.
Right. Well, we did have issues raised last time about the minutes, so we'll check that out and look at.
We can provide a link to
maybe they're not as full as perhaps people would like, but we'll pick that up. Is there anything else you want to ask? And just, you mentioned a meeting that the Commissioner attends with the taxi trade this year. Can you actually provide some dates where Mike Brown has gone and attended the meetings and met the taxi trade?
We'll send the dates through.
Good. I'm not aware he has, so that will be interesting. Helen, Gareth, thank you so much. That has been really, really useful. It's been a really good discussion this morning. I know our members are very engaged. There's lots of bits of extra information we would like, and probably in quite a timely manner, because we want this report either to influence what you've got coming out or to perhaps respond to it. So we just need to understand the timings of some of your work as well. But thank you so much. I know, Gareth, you're coming before us again next month, looking at another area of your empire. So we look forward to that. Thank you both very much indeed. So members, we've got more business members. So can we note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
And can we also delegate authority to me in consultation with party group leaders to agree the output from this investigation?
Agreed.
Okay, and I'm now going to take the rest of the public. We're still in session.